Welcome back, my friend. Before tonight's story begins, take a quiet moment for yourself. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let tonight's quiet journey begin. There is a place on Earth, deeper than any mountain is tall, where sunlight has never existed, where the weight of the ocean could crush steel, and where, even now, almost no human has ever been. It lies nearly 7 miles down, and tonight we descend toward it. Long before submersibles reached its floor, before sonar traced its shape, before anyone knew a place called Challenger Deep existed, ships passed quietly over this water, unaware that beneath them the planet opened downward into darkness. And the first hint of that abyss came not with a descent, but with a line lowered into the sea, where the ocean opens beneath itself. In the Western Pacific, far from the crowded ports of Europe, far from the trade routes that once filled the Atlantic with sails, there were waters that seemed to offer very little to the eye. Their surface moved like any other ocean surface. Wind crossed them, swells rose and settled, clouds passed above in slow formations, and to the sailors who crossed those waters in the 19th century, there was often no visible sign that anything unusual lay below. That was part of the mystery. The greatest depths on Earth do not announce themselves. A mountain may rise into clouds. A canyon may cut across a landscape. A volcano may smoke. But the deepest place on the planet hides under a calm skin of water, showing almost nothing of its existence to those above. Ships passed near what we now call the Mariana Trench without knowing they were crossing the edge of a geological womb. There were no instruments aboard early vessels that could reveal such things in detail. Mariners could measure stars, winds, currents, and approximate positions. They could sound coastal waters with weighted lines, but the open ocean, especially the very deep ocean, remained largely in unmeasured darkness. And so, for centuries, people imagined the abyss more than they understood it. Some believed the sea had bottomless places. Others thought the deep was uniform and featureless, a vast flat plain covered in sediment. Both ideas carried a kind of silence. Both underestimated what was there, because far below those passing ships, the earth itself was bending. One tectonic plate was sliding beneath another in a process so slow it could not be seen by human eyes, and yet so powerful it was reshaping part of the planet. The Pacific Plate, moving over immense spans of time, was descending beneath the Mariana Plate, and where that happened, the crust folded downward, not into a simple valley, but into an ocean trench of astonishing scale, a place that would one day be understood as the deepest known depression on Earth. But in the beginning, none of this had a clear name. Only hints existed, only scattered clues, and the sea kept most of them. It is strange to imagine those early crossings now. Wooden ships, canvas sails, iron fittings creaking in salt air, men standing watch at night, lantern light moving gently on decks, the sound of rigging in wind, and beneath them not a few 100 meters of water, not a few thousand, but nearly 11 kilometers of ocean. Though no one aboard could have guessed it, the contrast feels almost impossible. human fragility above, planetary depth below, and between them only water. In late-night thinking, this is one of the most haunting things about the Mariana Trench. It existed in complete indifference. Long before it was measured, storms crossed above it. Empires rose and fell without knowing it was there. Wars were fought, maps were redrawn, and still the trench waited in darkness, as though some parts of Earth are content to remain undiscovered until curiosity catches up. Even the life of the surface ocean offered little warning. Waves do not become darker over an abyss. Swells do not deepen in visible proportion to what lies below. The sea keeps its secrets with remarkable discipline, and perhaps that is why deep ocean discovery has always felt different from exploring land. Land reveals, ocean conceals. A mountain invites ascent. The abyss resists descent. To approach the Mariana Trench, even in imagination, is to approach a place where ordinary human intuition begins to fail. We are accustomed to height. Buildings, cliffs, towers, peaks. These can be pictured. Depth on that scale is harder. Nearly 7 miles downward is not easily imagined. It is closer to abstraction, a vertical silence, a falling beyond familiar reference. And yet this hidden place shaped the earth while remaining unknown to those passing over it. That alone gives it a kind of ancient presence, as though the trench belongs less to human history than to geological time. And geological time moves differently. It does not hurry. It does not narrate. It accumulates centimeter by centimeter, pressure upon pressure, age upon age, until entire sections of the planet fall downward into darkness. Long before sonar, before bathyscaphes, before scientific expeditions, the trench already existed in full. Cold, crushing, silent, its pressures immense enough to collapse unprotected structures, its waters permanently black, its floor carrying sediments that drifted down over uncounted centuries like slow underwater snowfall, and still no human eye had seen it. There is something almost meditative in dwelling on that. The deepest place on Earth was real long before it was known. Reality preceding awareness, mystery preceding measurement. In some ways, that is the true beginning of this story. Not the first expedition, not the first sounding, but the long era when the trench existed only as an recognized fact beneath passing ships. Because discovery often begins before anyone realizes discovery has begun. It begins when something is there, waiting, and someone eventually asks how deep the water is. That question would come. A weighted line would one day descend. Numbers would rise back up, and those numbers would disturb assumptions. But before all that, there was this earlier chapter, the chapter of ignorance, the chapter of quiet crossings, the chapter in which sailors moved over the edge of the deepest place on Earth and never knew it. And perhaps that is where a late-night story about the Mariana Trench should begin. Not with machines, not with records, but with a calm sea and a hidden abyss opening beneath it. HMS Challenger and the first sounding, 1875. By the year 1875, the age of guessing had begun. Slowly, to give way to the age of measurement, not everywhere, not all at once, but enough that the ocean, which for centuries had been treated as a surface to cross rather than a world to study, was starting to reveal itself to science. And much of that change in the history of the deep sea passes through one ship, HMS Challenger. She had not been built as a pure research vessel. She began life as a warship of the Royal Navy, but in the 1870s, she was transformed for a different purpose. Guns removed, laboratories installed, storage modified for instruments, specimen jars, dredges, thermometers, sounding gear. A warship altered into something quieter, a vessel made not for battle, but for questions. And in late-night reflection, there is something almost poetic about that machine designed for conflict, becoming a tool for wonder. When Challenger left on her great scientific expedition in 1872, almost no one knew how much she would change our understanding of the Earth. Her voyage would last nearly 4 years. She would cross oceans, collect thousands of specimens, measure temperatures, study currents, examine life at depths many believed lifeless, and, perhaps most hauntingly, she would lower lines into darkness no one had measured before. It is easy today to forget how difficult deep sounding once was. There was no digital depth recorder, no sonar, no live display mapping the seafloor, only weighted line, rope, patience, calculation, and the sea. To take a sounding in deep water was an act of endurance. A lead weight or sounding apparatus would descend into blackness, line paid out slowly, sometimes for hours, and all the while the ship drifted, currents pulled, errors threatened, every measurement carried uncertainty, and yet they kept lowering line because the unknown invited it. In March 1875, near the Western Pacific, Challenger made one of those soundings. No one aboard knew in advance what the result would suggest. Perhaps another very deep place, perhaps merely another number to add to a growing chart. But as the line descended farther and farther, something unusual emerged. It kept going, past expected depths, past what many assumed likely, past the ordinary imagination of ocean bottom. At last, the sounding returned a figure of 4,475 fathoms, roughly 8,184 meters. By that measurement, later refinements would reveal even greater depths nearby. But in that moment, this was astonishing. The deepest ocean depth yet measured, a place so profound it seemed almost unreal. And perhaps the most beautiful part of that moment is how simple it was. No dramatic explosion, no triumphant flag planted, no humans standing on the bottom, only a number written into a log. And yet that number quietly altered the map of Earth, because once recorded, it could not be ignored. The ocean was not merely vast, it was vertically far stranger than many had imagined. It contained abysses, real abysses, and the location would eventually become associated with what we now call Challenger Deep, named fittingly for the ship that first hinted at its existence. There is something moving about names born that way, not imposed in conquest, but earned through attention. Challenger Deep, a name shaped by a line lowered into darkness, and in late night thought, that act feels almost symbolic. Human knowledge often advances not through dramatic leaps, but through careful lowering into what we do not yet understand. A question, a measurement, a quiet persistence. That is what happened here. And what did the crew see when they made this historic sounding? Very little. That is part of the wonder. They did not gaze upon a trench wall. They did not witness the bottom. They saw sea and sky much as before. The revelation existed largely in inference, in mathematics, in trust that the measurement meant what it suggested. This is a subtle kind of discovery, and perhaps a profound one. To know something extraordinary exists without seeing it directly, only because evidence, patiently gathered, points there. That is science at its quietest and perhaps at its most beautiful. The deeper implication took time to unfold. One sounding does not fully describe a trench. One measurement does not reveal geology, but it opened a door, and once opened, others would step through. Oceanography itself would grow partly in that shadow. The idea that the seafloor possessed dramatic forms, that extreme depth could harbor unknown conditions, that perhaps life, geology, even the limits of Earth's systems could be studied there. All of that, in some sense, leaned on moments like this. A weighted line descending in 1875. It is easy in modern life, surrounded by satellites and instant data, to miss how extraordinary such patience was. Hours for a single measurement, weeks for a sequence, years for an expedition. And yet the slowness gave it gravity. Knowledge arrived with effort and therefore carried weight. There is also something almost intimate in imagining the officers and scientists aboard that night, perhaps reviewing figures by lamplight, perhaps checking calculations twice, perhaps sensing, though not yet fully knowing, that something important had happened. Did they feel awe? Did they recognize they had touched the edge of the deepest known place on Earth? Maybe only partially. Discovery often reveals its full significance later, but still, a line had gone down, a number had returned, and the world was larger and deeper than before. In late-night storytelling, this moment feels like hearing the first knock from the abyss, not entering it, not descending into it, only hearing, faintly, that something immense is there, waiting. And from this point forward, the Mariana Trench was no longer purely hidden. It had been hinted at, measured, named in part. Its silence disturbed, its existence entering human thought. And all because, in 1875, aboard HMS Challenger, someone lowered a line and did not expect it to go so far. A place darker than night. Once the first soundings suggested extraordinary depth, a new question emerged. Not simply how deep the trench might be, but what existed there. What was it like at the bottom of such pressure? That question lingered for decades, because measuring depth and understanding a place are not the same. A number can tell you how far something falls. It cannot tell you what darkness feels like. And the Mariana Trench, even after being recognized, remained largely unimaginable. For one reason above all, almost nothing in ordinary human experience prepares the mind for a world without light. We think we know darkness, night in the countryside, a room without a lamp, a moonless road. But those are not true absences of light. there is always some glow. Stars, air glow, distant windows, reflected sky. Even midnight carries traces. The deep ocean does not. Below a certain depth, sunlight weakens, then fades, then ends, and farther down, much farther down, there is no dawn to wait for, no sunrise coming, no horizon that will brighten, only permanent black. This is why darker than night is not a metaphor. It is almost literal inadequacy, because night, as we know it, still belongs to the world of light. The Mariana Abyss does not. It belongs to something else. And for early oceanographers, this raised unsettling questions. Could life exist there? Could anything survive where no plant could photosynthesize? Where temperatures hovered near freezing? Where pressure mounted to levels difficult even to conceive? At sea level, the human body lives under 1 atmosphere of pressure. At Challenger deep, more than 1,000 times that. A force so immense that ordinary structures fail. Steel can buckle, glass can shatter, unprotected machinery collapses, and all of that pressure is silent. That may be the strangest part. We often imagine extreme forces as noisy explosions, impacts, roaring motion. But deep pressure does not roar. It simply exists, unceasing, a weight laid upon every surface, every second, forever. And in late night reflection, this feels almost philosophical, because the Mariana Trench is not frightening in the way storms are frightening. Storms move, strike, pass. The abyss does something quieter. It persists, an eternal pressure, a darkness without event, a silence so complete it begins to feel less like emptiness and more like presence. Early scientists could only infer such conditions. No human had gone there. No camera had shown the bottom. Yet calculations made the picture unavoidable. The deeper the water, the greater the load. The deeper the load, the stranger the environment. And slowly, the trench transformed in imagination, not merely a deep hole, but another kind of world. Alien. Though on Earth, there was also a psychological effect in thinking about such depths. Victorian science, for all its confidence, still carried awe and perhaps unease, because if the planet held regions so extreme, so inaccessible, what else remained unknown? The Mariana depths suggested Earth was less familiar than surface life, encouraged us to believe. That realization has always accompanied deep ocean discovery. The sense that our maps describe only the skin, and below the skin, other realities wait. Some thinkers even treated the abyss almost mythically, not in the old sense of sea monsters, though those legends lingered, but as a frontier where ordinary categories failed. Neither land nor navigable sea, neither empty nor understood. A boundary of knowledge, and boundaries often disturb people because they expose limits. In this case, limits of survival, limits of technology, limits of imagination. Imagine, if you can, a particle of organic matter drifting downward into the trench, a fragment of plankton, a dead cell, a marine snowflake. It falls, not for seconds, but for days, slowly descending through colder and darker layers, passing zones where strange creatures glow with bioluminescence, passing into regions where even that intermittent light may disappear, until at last it settles on sediments in blackness no eye has seen. This was happening long before humans understood it, a hidden snowfall into the deepest place on Earth. Even that image carries a kind of late-night hush. And then there was the question of life. Could anything live under such crushing force? Many doubted it. The deep seemed too hostile, too cold, too deprived, too absolute. And perhaps that doubt revealed something about human bias. We often mistake unfamiliar conditions for impossible ones, yet nature repeatedly exceeds those assumptions, though proof would come later. Even early speculation began to loosen certainty. Perhaps life adapted. Perhaps the abyss was not sterile. Perhaps darkness itself did not mean death. These possibilities made the trench more mysterious, not less, because a dead abyss is one thing, a living abyss another. And all of this remained unresolved for decades, measured, discussed, imagined, but unseen, which may be why this phase in the story has such power, because mystery remained largely intact. The trench had a name, depth estimates, scientific interest, and still almost everything essential about it lay hidden. It was, in a sense, known and unknown at once. And perhaps many of the most profound things are like that. We can approach them intellectually, define them, calculate them, and still remain far from experiencing what they are. The Mariana Trench, in this period, was exactly that, an idea suspended between fact and imagination, a measured abyss, still wrapped in darkness. And maybe that is why it lingered in the scientific mind, not simply because it was deep, but because it suggested a place where Earth itself became strange, a place darker than night, colder than expectation, heavier than intuition, and silent beyond analogy. A place where, even before humans descended, the abyss had already begun changing how humans thought about the planet. Because once you know such a place exists, the world no longer feels quite as shallow as before. Mapping the abyss. Knowing a place exists is one thing. Understanding its shape is another. After the early soundings of the 19th century, the Mariana Trench remained, for a long time, more suggestion than structure. A point of extraordinary depth had been measured, but a point is not a landscape. A single sounding is like touching one stone in darkness and trying to imagine an entire cathedral. The mind can infer, but it cannot yet see. And so the next chapter in the story of the trench became a quieter, slower kind of exploration. Not descent into the abyss, but the attempt to map it, to give form to what had long existed as mystery. This work unfolded gradually through the 20th century, and it changed not only how people understood the Mariana Trench, but how they understood the floor of the ocean itself. Because for centuries, many imagined the deep seabed as broadly featureless, perhaps sloping, perhaps uneven, but not dramatic, not sculpted on continental scales. That assumption would not survive modern mapping. At first, improved soundings accumulated, more measurements, more stations, more attempts to refine what earlier numbers had only hinted at. And with each addition, something began to emerge. The great depth was not isolated. It belonged to a larger form, a trench, long, curving, immense, running roughly 2,500 kilometers through the Western Pacific. Not a pit in the ordinary sense, but a wound in the seafloor, a boundary where one plate descended beneath another, a visible expression, if such darkness can be called visible, of tectonic force. And then came one of the great revolutions in ocean science: echo sounding, sound sent downward, signals returning, depth inferred from time, no longer only line lowered patiently into blackness, but acoustic glimpses of hidden terrain. And in late night reflection, there is something beautiful in that. Humans listening to the bottom, mapping darkness through echoes, as though the abyss answered only in sound, with echo sounding and later increasingly sophisticated sonar. The seafloor became less abstract. Contours appeared, slopes, ridges, deeper pockets. The trench acquired dimensions. It could be traced, studied, compared, and the old idea of a flat ocean floor began collapsing. In its place emerged a far stranger earth, mid-ocean ridges, longer than mountain chains, submarine volcanoes, fracture zones, canyons, abyssal plains, and trenches deeper than imagination had comfortably allowed. The Mariana Trench became part of a larger revelation, the hidden geography of the planet, a second Earth beneath the sea. Perhaps no comparison captured the scale more powerfully than the one people began repeating. If Mount Everest were placed inside the deepest part of the trench, its summit would still not rise above sea level. Even now, that thought has a way of slowing the mind, because Everest already strains human imagination. To picture something deeper than that height in reverse feels almost like conceptual vertigo, and yet the trench made it real. What is striking is that mapping did not make the Mariana less mysterious. In some ways, it deepened mystery, because shape invites further questions. How stable are trench walls? How does sediment move at such depth? How do earthquakes alter the floor? How old is this structure? What happens where the crust descends farther into Earth? Every contour discovered seemed to generate more unknowns. That often happens in science. Knowledge does not end mystery, it refines it. By mid-century, the trench was no longer merely a remarkable sounding from the age of sail. It had become recognized as a defining feature of planetary geology, a place where Earth's crust was active, dynamic, still moving, still shaping itself. And in this recognition, the trench acquired a kind of living quality, not alive as organisms are alive, but alive in geological time, still forming, still shifting, still participating in forces older than human history. Late at night, this thought can feel almost humbling. While nations change borders and generations pass, the trench continues its slow tectonic work below, unconcerned, unobserved much of the time, yet never inactive. There was also an emotional transformation in mapping. Before maps, the abyss is almost pure imagination. After maps, it enters relationship with thought. You can point to it, trace it, study its length, imagine moving along its rim. Mystery becomes locatable, and something locatable feels, paradoxically, both more real and more uncanny, because now the deepest place on Earth was not a rumor of measurement. It was part of the charted world, and still almost no human had seen it directly. That tension gives this chapter its power. Increasingly known, still profoundly unseen. There is also a quiet irony here. The Mariana Trench was mapped in important ways Before humans physically reached its deepest point, we drew forms of a place we had not entered, listened to a region we had not visited, understood structure before experience. That too says something about human curiosity. We often reach with ideas before we reach with bodies. Thought goes first, then descent follows, and descent would come. But before that dramatic chapter, there was this one, the patient making of an invisible landscape, the slow conversion of abyss into map, the moment when the deepest place on Earth stopped being merely a number and became a geography, a trench, a boundary, a planetary scar. And once that happened, the next question became unavoidable. If we can map the abyss, can we go there? Trieste, 1960. For nearly 85 years after the sounding of HMS Challenger, the deepest place on Earth remained, in a profound sense, unvisited, mapped in part, measured with growing confidence, discussed in science, imagined in books, but not reached. The abyss still held its final distance, because to know a trench exists is one thing, to descend into it another entirely. The problem was pressure, always pressure. At Challenger Deep, the ocean does not merely surround a vessel, it presses upon it with a force so immense that every engineering decision becomes a wager against collapse. The abyss does not tolerate weakness, it exposes it, and so, for decades, the question remained not simply whether humans wished to go, but whether they could build something that would survive the attempt. The answer came in an unlikely form, a craft unlike ordinary submarine, not long, sleek, and naval in character, but almost improbable, strange, experimental, quietly radical. Bathyscaphe Trieste, even its design carried the logic of the deep, a massive float filled with gasoline, chosen because it was lighter than water and resistant to crushing pressure. Below it, suspended like a thought beneath a cloud, a small steel sphere. That sphere would hold the crew, its walls thick, its interior cramped, its survival dependent on calculations so unforgiving that error could mean disappearance. And still, two men entered it, Jacques Picard and Watt Don Walsh. January 23rd, 1960, Western Pacific. Morning. The sea above gave little sign of what lay below, as so often in this story. Calm surface, hidden abyss. The Bathyscaphe floated before descent. Preparations checked, systems examined. No certainty, only readiness. And perhaps, somewhere beneath technical concentration, something harder to name, apprehension, wonder, resolve, because they were preparing to attempt what no human being had ever done, to enter the deepest known part of the planet. Late at night, imagining those moments before descent carries a particular stillness. Two men in a steel sphere, not much larger than necessity allowed, knowing that below them lay nearly 11 kilometers of water, knowing no rescue could easily reach them, knowing the experiment would unfold in a place almost wholly indifferent to human ambition. And then, like they release, the descent began slowly, not plunging like a falling object, but sinking with grave patience downward through the upper ocean, where sunlight still existed, where familiar marine life moved, where the world, though already remote from the surface, still belonged to known seas. Then deeper, the light diminished, blue darkened, shadows thickened. The old transition began from ocean humans understand to ocean humans had only theorized. Hours passed. This is important to remember. The descent was not dramatic in the cinematic sense. It was long, measured, almost meditative, a gradual surrender of surface reality, meter by meter, layer by layer, the sea closing above, pressure mounting, silence deepening, and inside the sphere, two people waiting with instruments and thought. There is something extraordinary about the duration, nearly 5 hours descending. Imagine 5 hours moving only downward into blackness. No horizon, no landscape rushing past, only gauges, sounds of the craft, occasional awareness of the unimaginable column of water growing overhead. Time itself may have altered in perception, minutes lengthening, attention sharpening, small noises becoming significant. In accounts of deep submergence, there is often mention of sound, creaks, pings, structural murmurs, and in a vessel under extreme pressure. Such sounds acquire psychological force. A small noise can feel enormous. A routine strain can sound like warning, and still they continued. This too is part of the courage of the dive, not dramatic heroism, sustained composure. Hour after hour, as they descended, they moved into regions no human senses had ever occupied. That alone is difficult to overstate. Many explorations extend known presence. This one created presence where there had been none. For the first time, human consciousness itself was being carried toward Challenger Deep. That fact has a kind of philosophical grandeur. The deepest point on Earth, long measured but unseen, was about to receive visitors. And yet, even this phrase, receive visitors, feels almost too gentle. The abyss does not receive. It permits, briefly, perhaps. That is closer, and the deeper Trieste sank, the more the mission seemed to pass from expedition into encounter, not conquest. Encounter with pressure, with darkness, with the physical limits of design, with the hidden scale of Earth. In late night thought, this may be why the Trieste descent still holds such power. It was not only a technical achievement, it was a human crossing of an invisible threshold, a movement beyond where our species had ever physically gone on the planet it inhabits. That has a rare quality, almost mythic, yet documented, real. By the time they approached the bottom, nearly 5 hours had passed. 5 hours falling into geological silence. 5 hours leaving the ordinary world farther above, and somewhere below, sediments waited in darkness, the floor of Challenger Deep untouched by human presence, waiting, if waiting is the word, for the first arrival. And as Trieste continued down through blackness, the question that had lingered since 1875, what lies at the bottom, was no longer theoretical. It was minutes from becoming experience. The window turns black. There is a moment in a deep descent when the surface world does not disappear all at once. It recedes gradually, almost gently, and that gentleness can be deceptive, because what feels like a slow transition is, in truth, a crossing into conditions increasingly hostile to ordinary life. During the descent of Bathyscaphe Trieste, This transition unfolded not in sudden drama, but in stages, and perhaps that made it more unsettling. At first, there was still light, not bright surface light, not the lively shimmer seen from a ship's deck, but a dim blue filtered through water, a weakened remnant of day. It lingered, then thinned, then began to fail. The ocean has zones of disappearance. Colors vanish in sequence. Red first, then orange, then yellow, until even blue, last companion of descending sunlight, fades into something harder to name. And somewhere in that progression, the men inside Trieste watched the outside world simplify. Less form, less contrast, less visible life, as though the ocean was slowly erasing itself. There is something almost ceremonial in that, a stripping away, surface complexity, yielding to elemental conditions. Light, then less light, then nearly none, and then harmony, black, not dark blue, not shadow, black. The view through the observation port did not reveal a dramatic landscape at that depth. There were no canyon walls rising beside them in cinematic clarity, no illuminated abyss opening like a cavern. Mostly, there was absence, and that absence has its own presence, because true blackness does not merely conceal objects, it alters perception. It deprives the mind of reference. No horizon, no distance cues, no motion against visible background. Only instruments confirming descent continues. Only trust that the craft still moves downward. Late at night, this may be one of the hardest things to imagine, to sit in a steel sphere surrounded by miles of water, looking through a port where the universe outside has become featureless black, and continue downward, because at such moments, imagination can become an adversary. Every creak amplified, every uncertainty enlarged, and there were sounds. Accounts of deep diving craft often mention structural noises, small reports, metal adjusting under stress, pressure speaking through material. Inside Trieste, such sounds would not have been easily ignored. How could they be at ordinary depths? A creak is a sound. At extreme depth, it can feel like prophecy, and the pressure was mounting tenuously. Every meter deeper added force, not metaphorically, physically. The ocean growing heavier above them with every passing moment. There is an almost unbearable elegance in that fact. The same water, gentle enough to form rain, can, at sufficient depth, become a load of unimaginable violence. And yet, it expresses that violence in silence. No roar, no attack, only pressure, relentless. One story, often associated with the dive, lingers precisely because it captures the psychological fragility of the descent. At great depth, a loud cracking sound was reportedly heard. For a moment, alarm. What failed? Was something breaking? Had the sphere been compromised in a place where failure would likely be final? Such a sound carries enormous weight. Later, it was understood the source was not catastrophic, but in the moment they could not know, and still they continue. That detail matters because courage is often misdescribed as absence of fear. It is not. Sometimes it is descent, continuing after fear has already entered the room, and perhaps nowhere is that clearer than here. Two men, a steel sphere, a window turned black, a sound in the pressure, and still downward. There is also a strange inversion at these depths. We often associate exploration with widening horizons. Here, Exploration narrowed experience. Less could be seen, less could be perceived directly. The deeper they went, the less sensory richness remained, and yet the significance of the journey increased as though meaning grew, while visibility diminished. That paradox belongs to the abyss, and perhaps to many profound things. The blackness outside was not emptiness in the literal sense. Water filled it, particles drifted, possibly life moved unseen. But to human perception, it approached emptiness, and that may be why so many descriptions of the deep borrow language from space: alien, void, otherworldly, because familiar terrestrial language begins to thin out there. Even ocean feels too ordinary a word. What surrounded Trieste at that stage was not ocean in the way beaches teach us ocean. It was a pressure realm, a darkness regime, a domain almost abstract in its extremity. And still, the little port looked outward, a human eye, however constrained, meeting the edge of the unknown. There is something unforgettable in that image, not because much was visible, but because almost nothing was. Sometimes absence itself is the revelation. As descent continued, blackness became not an episode, but the environment, permanent until ascent. No dawn ahead, no brighter layer waiting, only the long continuation downward toward a floor no human had seen. And in that blackness, time may have altered again. When external visual change ceases, duration can feel strange. Minutes lose anchors. Attention turns inward, to instruments, to thought, to the vessel itself, to the next sound, to the question, how much farther? And eventually that question narrowed, not how much farther, until some unknown end, but how much farther until bottom, because the abyss, once theoretical, had become immediate, near enough to approach, near enough to touch. But before the bottom, there was this chapter, this long immersion in blackness, this passage through a realm where vision surrendered and pressure ruled, a place darker than ordinary night, darker even than imagination had comfortably allowed. And when the window turned black, the Mariana Trench ceased to be merely a destination. It became an environment human beings had entered for the first time. Touching Challenger deep. After nearly 5 hours, descending through blackness, through pressure, through the slow narrowing of the known world, there came a moment when motion began to change. It was subtle, not dramatic, not the abrupt impact one might imagine, but a transition. The long downward passage was ending. The floor of Challenger Deep was near, and perhaps no place on Earth had ever been approached with such accumulated uncertainty, because until that moment, the deepest known point on the planet had existed for humans largely as abstraction, numbers, contours, calculations, speculation. Now it was becoming terrain, real, immediate, almost within reach, inside Bathyscaphe Trieste. The descent, slow, attention sharpened. After hours in blackness, every indication mattered. Instruments, response, movement, and then bottom, or something close enough to be recognized as bottom. The Bathyscaphe settled into the deepest known part of the earth. Late at night, it is difficult not to pause there, because the sentence itself carries weight. Human beings reached the deepest point on the planet. That had never been true before, and now, suddenly, it was history. Yet, what they encountered did not resemble triumph. There was no conquering gesture, no dramatic declaration, only observation, stillness, and sediment. Accounts describe fine material stirred by landing, a cloud of silt or soft bottom deposits lifting into surrounding water, a kind of underwater dust, the very act of arrival, briefly obscuring what they had come to see. There is something almost symbolic in that, the abyss, not revealing itself cleanly at first, but in suspension, as though even arrival came through veiling. And what was there? Not towering formations, not some theatrical underworld, but something quieter, a seafloor, mud-like sediments, particles, resting after unimaginable descent through the water column, the deepest floor of Earth appearing, in one sense, almost humble. And perhaps that humility is part of its power. Reality often exceeds imagination, not by being grander, but by being stranger in its simplicity. There was also the famous and much debated observation associated with the dive, a possible sighting interpreted at the time as a flatfish-like organism, something moving, something suggesting complex life, even at those pressures. Later interpretations challenged whether this identification was correct, perhaps a misunderstanding, perhaps another kind of organism. The debate remains part of the story, and in a way, the uncertainty matters as much as the claim, because what it revealed was profound. Even at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, humans were still unsure what was possible. The abyss was not giving up certainty easily, and perhaps that was fitting. Still, the possibility itself was electrifying, because if life existed there, then many assumptions about the limits of life required reconsideration. The deepest place on Earth would not be merely a zone of physical extremity. It might be habitat, and that idea carried consequences far beyond oceanography. It touched biology, adaptation, even the search for life in other hostile environments. Sometimes a frontier alters thought far beyond itself. This was one of those moments, but perhaps the most moving aspect of the Trieste landing is how brief human presence there actually was. Roughly 20 minutes. 20 minutes at the bottom after 5 hours descending and a long ascent still ahead. 20 minutes. That brevity gives the moment its fragility, like touching another world through a crack that closes quickly. There was no leisurely exploration, no wandering across the floor, only a short interval in which humans and abyss shared location, then separation again. And in late night thought, that briefness feels deeply human. We spend enormous effort reaching threshold, and sometimes can remain there only moments. Yet those moments alter history. The floor of Challenger Deep had now been visited, no longer merely inferred, seen however imperfectly, touched, experienced. And once something has been experienced, it enters memory differently than theory ever can. There is also something almost spiritual, though the word may be too large, in the image of two people sitting in a steel sphere at the deepest point on Earth. Above them, nearly 7 miles of water. Above that, weather, continents, cities, entire civilizations, and below them, nothing deeper. They were, in a literal sense, as far down as humans had ever gone on the planet. That carries a peculiar finality, the bottom of bottoms, a geographical absolute. Few places possess that quality. Even the highest mountains can be compared with other peaks, but the deepest point, there is only one. And for 20 minutes, they were there. Yet what strikes me most is how quiet the achievement was. No crowds watching live, no global broadcast in real time, no spectacle. Only a small crew in the abyss doing what humans have sometimes done at their best, reaching beyond what seemed impossible, not to possess, but to understand. And then came the necessity of leaving, because the abyss permits little lingering. The descent had achieved its purpose. The experiment had become event. History had been made, and now survival required ascent. But before Trieste rose, something irreversible had happened. The Mariana Trench was no longer only a place humans imagined from above. Human presence had crossed into it, even briefly, even vulnerably. And because of that, the question changed. It was no longer, can humans reach the deepest place on Earth? That question had been answered. Now it became, what will we understand there if we return? 20 minutes at the bottom. 20 minutes for a number so small, it holds an astonishing share of meaning. After nearly 5 hours descending through the dark, after calculations, engineering, risk, and the long psychological passage into the abyss, human beings remained at the bottom of Challenger Deep for only about 20 minutes before beginning the ascent. And somehow, that brevity makes the moment feel even larger, because it reminds us how thin the margin was, how provisional the encounter, how little of the abyss was mastered. It was not occupation, it was visitation, a brief stay in a place where humans did not belong for long. Inside Bathyscaphe Trieste, time at the bottom could not have felt ordinary. 20 minutes on a clock can pass quickly in familiar life, waiting for tea to steep, watching twilight fade, listening to a short piece of music. But 20 minutes at the deepest point on Earth, surrounded by crushing pressure and nearly 7 miles of water, must have carried another texture entirely. Perhaps stretched, perhaps sharpened, perhaps divided into moments noticed more intensely than usual. Every observation mattered, every decision mattered, every minute carried weight. And there is something deeply late night in contemplating that. How much meaning can gather inside a very short span, how history sometimes condenses into minutes. The men aboard had not come to linger. They could not. The Bathyscaphe was remarkable, but it was not a mobile exploration vehicle in the modern sense. It was a feat of descent, a proof of possibility. Its task was to reach, observe, survive, return. Nothing more extravagant than that, and perhaps nothing more was needed, because proof changes everything. Once a boundary has been crossed once, it can no longer claim to be uncrossable. That is one of the quiet revolutions of exploration. The first crossing matters beyond its duration, and yet what followed is, in some ways, just as haunting as the descent itself. Because after Trieste returned, almost no one went back, not for decades. That fact often surprises people. We imagine great achievements immediately opening new eras, but history is not always so direct. Sometimes the first breakthrough stands almost alone, an outpost of possibility, waiting for a future not yet ready. That happened here. 1960. Humans reached the deepest place on Earth. Then, a long silence. Years decades. The abyss, touched once, resumed much of its isolation. Late at night, that silence feels extraordinary, as though humanity knocked at the door of the deepest trench, entered briefly, then withdrew for half a century. Why? Partly technology, partly cost, partly risk. The engineering challenge remained immense, and perhaps there was also a subtler reason. The dive had shown how hard such presence would always be. The abyss was reachable, but not easily, never casually. Its remoteness had not been conquered, only interrupted. That distinction matters. We often speak of exploration in language of victory, but the Mariana Trench resists that vocabulary. No one conquered Challenger Deep. Trieste endured it for 20 minutes, then left. And perhaps that is a nobler description anyway. Endurance has more humility than conquest. There is also something moving in imagining the ascent beginning, ballast released, the slow reversal, after hours descending, now rising, leaving the bottom behind, the sediments settling again after disturbance, the darkness reclaiming stillness, the deepest place on earth returning to its long solitude, as though human presence had been only a passing thought in geological silence. That image stays with me because the trench was ancient before Trieste arrived and remained ancient after it left. History was made, yet the abyss itself scarcely changed. This too is part of what makes the Mariana different from many frontiers. It does not absorb human drama easily. It dwarfs it. There is a philosophical weight in that. We often measure importance by how much we alter a place, but some places matter precisely because they alter us while remaining almost unchanged themselves. The Mariana Trench is one of those places. The 20 minutes at the bottom changed human understanding, yet the trench kept its darkness, its pressure, its silence, its indifference. And perhaps that indifference is not coldness. Perhaps it is simply scale. Geological scale does not react to human milestones the way human history does. It receives them into much longer time. There is another reason those 20 minutes endure. They became almost legendary because of scarcity. Few humans have ever been there. Very few. Rarity concentrates imagination, and so the briefness of the visit did not diminish its symbolic force. It intensified it. A short stay became monumental. A moment became epochal. And for more than 50 years, the Trieste dive stood alone in human descent to Challenger Deep. Think of that. Generations were born, aged and passed, while the deepest place on Earth remained unvisited again by people. Few achievements remain singular for so long. This one did, which gives those 20 minutes a strange afterlife. They did not end when the ascent began. They echoed through decades, through oceanography, through engineering, through the imagination of later explorers who would one day return. And maybe that is how some moments work. They continue long after they have passed, not by duration, but by consequence. So yes, 20 minutes, only 20. And yet, in those 20 minutes, humans crossed from speculation into presence, from map into encounter, from wondering whether the deepest point could be reached to knowing it had been reached. Then Trieste rose, and the abyss closed behind it. Quiet again, dark again, waiting for the next knock on its door. Robots go first. After the ascent of Bathyscaphe Trieste, something unusual happened in the history of exploration. The frontier did not immediately fill with human arrivals. It fell quiet, not forgotten, never forgotten, but quiet. The deepest place on Earth remained for decades, more often discussed than revisited. And yet silence in exploration does not always mean inactivity. Sometimes it means preparation. Sometimes it means technology is catching up to a question asked too early. That was the case here, because while people did not return to Challenger Deep in person for many years, machines began moving where people could not easily go. And in a sense, the next explorers were not human. They were robotic, uncrewed, patient, designed for pressure rather than breath. And perhaps that was inevitable. The abyss had shown how difficult human presence would be. So the next step was not to send people first, but instruments, cameras, sensors, mechanical eyes. This is a turning point in the story of the Mariana Trench, because until now, nearly everything depended on rare direct human attempts or indirect mapping. Now another form of presence emerged. Machines could linger where humans could not, go deeper without life support concerns, accept risks unacceptable for crewed missions, and perhaps most importantly, return data continuously that changed the relationship between humans and the abyss. We no longer touched it only through brief, heroic descents. We began, slowly, to study it. And study is a quieter, deeper form of encounter. One of the most remarkable things about robotic exploration is how unromantic it can seem until you look closely. A pressure-tolerant vehicle descending alone into blackness is, in its own way, as haunting as any crewed voyage, perhaps more so because there are no voices inside, no heartbeat, no human gaze looking out a port, only circuitry moving through a realm lethal to ordinary machinery, a kind of artificial courage, if one may borrow the phrase. Late at night, that image carries weight, a machine sinking mile after mile through darkness, not because it knows what it seeks, but because humans built curiosity into its path. That feels almost philosophical. We extended inquiry beyond the body, sent questions downward in mechanical form. Some early deep vehicles struggled, failures occurred, communication limits, equipment loss, pressure damage. The abyss remained unforgiving. It tested machines as it had tested imagination, and yet technology improved, materials strengthened, electronics adapted, design evolved. Bit by bit, the deep began to yield more than depth numbers. It began to offer glimpses, and glimpses matter. A single image from the abyss can alter understanding more viscerally than pages of data. Sediments, seafloor textures, unexpected life, particles drifting in still water. Even the visual emptiness of some frames had power, because emptiness itself became documented reality. No longer imagined darkness, recorded darkness. This was new. The Mariana was beginning, however slowly, to appear. One milestone, often remembered in this long arc, came with deep, uncrewed probes that reached Challenger Deep and transmitted data from the bottom. Not humans present, but human inquiry present. That distinction matters. Presence had become distributable. We could send instruments where we ourselves did not yet return. And in many ways, modern exploration depends on this logic. Robots go first. They test danger. They extend reach. They make later human descent more informed. The Abyss taught that lesson clearly. There is also something humbling in recognizing that some places may first be known through machines because the environment itself demands it, not because human courage is lacking, but because prudence is wisdom. The Mariana Trench did not yield to bravado. It required method, and robots embodied method. Careful, iterative, persistent, very unlike the old heroic image of conquest, perhaps closer to how knowledge actually grows. One probe descends, another improves. One sensor reveals a limit, another surpasses it, step by step, quietly. This rhythm suits late-night history because it values patience over spectacle, and patience is the true tempo of deep-sea science. Then came discoveries that further unsettled assumptions, signs of life at astonishing pressures, microbial possibilities, small creatures adapted to extremes, evidence accumulating that the abyss was not sterile. Again and again, robotic exploration widened the meaning of the trench, not just deepest place, not just geological scar, but ecosystem, however sparse, however strange, a living depth. That idea would have seemed extraordinary to earlier generations, and yet machines helped show it. There is a paradox here I often return to. Robots, which are not alive, helped reveal life in one of Earth's most hostile environments. A beautiful inversion, and they revealed something darker too. Human traces, debris, eventually even signs that pollution, including plastic contamination, reached astonishing depths. The deepest wilderness was not untouched. That discovery carried sorrow because it meant even the most remote abyss bore marks of the surface world. Machines brought back that truth as well. Exploration does not only flatter us, sometimes it indicts us, and perhaps that honesty is part of why it matters. By the time crude returned to Challenger Deep became imaginable again, robots had already changed the landscape of understanding. They had gone first. As the section title promises, they truly did. They entered after the long silence, kept inquiry alive, held the thread, and prepared the way. In some stories, the hero returns after an age of absence. Here, the return began with machines, silent emissaries, descending where humans hesitated, mechanical pioneers in black water. And because they went first, the abyss, once touched only briefly in 1960, was no longer waiting in quite the same way. It was being studied, watched, questioned again, and from that renewed questioning, another human descent, one solitary and very different, would one day emerge. James Cameron, Alone, 2012. More than half a century passed after the dive of Bathyscaphe Trieste before a human being returned alone to Challenger Deep. Half a century. That span matters because it reminds us how rare true returns to the abyss have been. This was not a frontier crowded by repeated footsteps. It remained, even in the 21st century, one of the least visited places on Earth. And then, in 2012, another descent, but very different from the first. Not two men in a bathyscaphe, built in the early Cold War. Not a proof of possibility mission, something more personal, more modern, and in its own way, more solitary. James Cameron, many knew him as a filmmaker long before they thought of him as a deep ocean explorer, but perhaps those identities were never as separate as they seemed. Storytelling and exploration share a trait. Both go toward what is unseen, and Cameron had long been drawn to the deep, not as metaphor, as place. The vehicle he descended in, Deep-Sea Challenger, was unlike Trieste in appearance and philosophy. Vertical, lean, designed with decades of technological advancement behind it. Purpose-built not only to survive descents, but to gather scientific observations, capture imagery, extend presence, a new generation of abyssal craft. And yet, for all the engineering sophistication, one ancient element remained unchanged. A single human entering darkness. That part was timeless. Late at night, there is something almost stark about the fact that he went alone, not metaphorically alone, literally alone. No companion sharing the confined space, no second voice, no one beside him. When the sea turned black, that alters the emotional texture of the descent, because solitude at ordinary scales is one thing. Solitude nearly 7 miles down, another. It carries a different weight. On March 26, 2012, the descent began, and with it, history resumed. The long gap after Trieste was broken, a human being was returning to the deepest known place on Earth. But unlike the earlier dive, which bore the feel of first arrival, this one carried another mood. Return, re-engagement, a second conversation with the abyss. And perhaps every return to a profound place asks a slightly different question than the first. The first asks, can we reach it? The return asks, what more can it tell us? As the submersible descended, familiar elements of abyssal narrative returned. Light fading, blackness gathering, pressure mounting, the long passage downward. And yet this descent also belonged, unmistakably, to a different era. Advanced cameras, scientific instruments, data collection ambitions, unimaginable. In 1960, the abyss was not only being touched, it was being studied more deliberately. Still, technology does not erase vulnerability. Even advanced systems can fail, and there were difficulties. Mechanical problems arose during the mission. Some intended sampling operations proved limited. The abyss again reminded explorers that control there is always partial. Even modern design negotiates with uncertainty. That continuity with the past is important. It keeps the story honest. Progress had come, but the trench remained no easy domain. There is something I find especially moving in the reports and imagery associated with this descent. Not dramatic monsters, not sensational revelation, but the texture of solitude, the sense of one consciousness, inhabiting the deepest place on Earth, looking outward into sediments and dark. That image feels almost existential, because at such a depth, ordinary distractions vanish. There is only the mission, the vessel, the environment, and thought. Perhaps that is one reason the dive continues to fascinate. It was not merely technical, it carried a human inwardness, a lone descent into a literal abyss, and the symbolism writes itself, though the reality needs no embellishment. Some compared the feat to space exploration, and the comparison has merit. But in one sense, the deep differs. Space often evokes openness. The abyss evokes enclosure, pressure from all sides. darkness as medium. The psychological geometry is different, not outward into vastness, downward into compression. And that gives the Mariana a distinct kind of gravity. Cameron spent hours associated with descent, bottom operations, and ascent, far longer engaged in mission activity than the brief 20-minute presence of Trieste. That too marked a change. The abyss was becoming, however cautiously, a place of longer scientific work, not only symbolic arrival, extended encounter, and yet, perhaps the most enduring significance of the dive lies elsewhere. It broke the long solitude of 1960. It proved crude return was not a singular historical accident. The deepest place could be revisited. Again, that matters enormously because repeated access transforms a legend into a field of study. The Mariana was beginning slowly to move from almost mythic frontier toward recurring scientific destination. Slowly, never casually, but truly. And there is one more layer. Cameron's public profile brought deep ocean exploration before a wider audience. People who may never have read technical oceanography found themselves thinking about Challenger Deep. Sometimes exploration advances not only through discovery, but through renewed attention. Curiosity spread outward, and curiosity has consequences. It funds, it inspires, it sends others after. In that sense, the lone descent echoed beyond science. It entered culture. Late at night, I think that matters because hidden places often need storytellers as much as engineers, people who remind the surface world that the abyss exists, that it still waits below. And when James Cameron rose again from Challenger Deep, he did not bring back conquest. No one brings that back from the Mariana. He brought back something better, renewed contact. Evidence that the conversation with the deepest place on Earth had resumed, and once resumed, others would follow, because after a solitary return, the abyss no longer felt closed again. It felt open, however narrowly, to further descent. Life in the crushing pressure. For much of human history, the deepest ocean was imagined as a place where life must fail. The reasoning seemed almost unavoidable. No sunlight, near freezing temperatures, crushing pressure beyond ordinary comprehension, scarcity of food, drifting down from above, conditions so extreme that many assumed biology itself had limits there. And perhaps what is most interesting, in hindsight, is not that people believed this, but how often life has overturned such certainty. Again and again, nature has exceeded the boundaries humans confidently proposed for it. The Mariana Trench would become one more example, and perhaps one of the most astonishing, because as evidence accumulated through landers, deep probes, sampling, and later descents, the abyss began revealing something extraordinary. Not abundance in the way coral reefs teem, not spectacle in the way surface oceans dazzle. Something quieter, more austere, but unmistakable. Life. This realization did not arrive as one dramatic revelation. It emerged gradually, as many profound truths do. Hints first, ambiguous observations, specimens difficult to interpret, then stronger evidence, then a pattern, then a changed understanding. One of the creatures often mentioned in discussions of the Hadal Zone, the deepest ocean regions associated with trenches, is the amphipod, Amphipoda, small crustaceans lands, almost humble in appearance, nothing mythic, nothing monstrous, and yet profoundly important because their existence at extreme depths tells a larger story. Life did not merely endure pressure, it adapted to it. That is a very different claim. Endurance suggests survival despite environment. Adaptation suggests environment woven into design, and that changes how we think about extremity. Pressure, then, is not simply obstacle. It can be habitat. Late at night, this idea can feel quietly transformative, that a place once imagined nearly impossible for life contains organisms for whom that place is home. The abyss ceases to be only hostile. It becomes ecological, a world. Researchers have also found remarkable microbial communities associated with deep-sea environments. Microbial life often rewrites the limits of the possible. It thrives where larger imagination hesitates, and in the Mariana context, such findings carry implications extending far beyond the trench itself, because if life can persist under such pressure, in darkness, with minimal energy, what other environments once dismissed as sterile might also harbor living systems? The question reaches outward to icy moons, subsurface oceans elsewhere. Planetary science listens when the deep sea speaks, and yet for all the cosmic implications, there is something intimate in staying with the trench itself. Imagine marine snow drifting downward, fragments of organic material, dead plankton, microscopic debris from surface worlds bright with sun, falling for days, settling at last on Hadal sediments. There, in the deepest darkness, organisms make a living from what slowly arrives, an economy of patience, a biology shaped by scarcity. There is something almost monastic in that. Slow, quiet, sustained, very unlike surface abundance. And perhaps that is why life in the Mariana feels so moving. It is not merely life surviving in dramatic adversity. It is life practicing another tempo, one suited to depth. There were discoveries too that unsettled researchers in other ways. Some deep organisms appeared to contain accumulated pollutants, including compounds associated with human activity. Even creatures in one of Earth's remotest environments bore traces of the surface world. That realization carried sorrow because it meant remoteness is not immunity. The deepest wilderness was connected, for better and worse, to the systems above. The abyss is not separate from us, only distant, and distance is not protection. Still, the biological story remains one of wonder. Consider the physical challenge alone. At Challenger Deep, pressures exceed 1,000 atmospheres. Human-engineered structures struggle there, yet cellular systems persist. Membranes function. Biochemistry proceeds. Life negotiates forces that seem, from our scale, impossible. How does one not feel awe before that? Sometimes the smallest organisms carry the grandest philosophical weight because they reveal reality is broader than our assumptions. And perhaps that is one quiet purpose of exploration, not simply to catalogue what exists, but to humble what we thought could exist. The Mariana has done that repeatedly. There is also a shift in tone once we accept the trench is inhabited. The deepest place on Earth is no longer merely a wound in geology. It is a living depth, even if sparsely, even if strangely. And living depth changes the emotional character of the abyss. It becomes less pure void, more hidden community, not empty darkness. Darkness with resonance. That matters. Language matters. Perception follows it. Even the old imagery of the abyss as dead silence grows more complicated, because where life exists, silence is never absolute. Processes occur, movements happen, predation, scavenging, reproduction, however subtle, unfold. The trench is not inert. It is active in ways once invisible to us. And perhaps most beautiful of all, these discoveries did not diminish mystery. They deepened it, because every answer opened new questions. How exactly do these organisms manage pressure at molecular levels? How isolated are trench ecosystems? How do food webs function so far below productive sunlight? How old are some of these adaptations? Mystery did not retreat, it multiplied. That is the mark of living science. And in late night reflection, I think this may be one of the most profound turns in the whole Mariana story. We began with a hidden abyss, feared as unimaginable depth, then a measured trench, then a reached frontier, and now a living world, sparse perhaps, severe certainly, but alive, which means the deepest point on Earth is not only a limit, it is also a habitat, a place where life, against expectation, found a way to remain. And once you know that, the darkness at the bottom no longer feels quite so empty as before. Plastic at the bottom of Earth. There are discoveries that enlarge wonder, and there are discoveries that carry a quieter grief. This is the second kind, because after decades of imagining the Mariana Trench as the remotest wilderness on Earth, a place so far removed from ordinary human reach that even visiting it required extraordinary effort, another truth emerged. Human traces had arrived before, or at least alongside our understanding, and some of those traces were plastic. Few facts in deep ocean history strike with such strange emotional force. The deepest place on Earth, a place darker than night, colder than expectation, pressed by more than 1,000 atmospheres, contains signs of our discarded materials. Even now, that can feel difficult to absorb, because remoteness carries a psychological promise. We want to believe that distance protects purity, that some places remain beyond contamination. The Mariana challenged that hope. Evidence accumulated gradually through deep-sea studies, observations and analyses suggesting plastic debris and microplastic contamination had reached astonishing depths, including trench environments. The specifics matter scientifically, but late at night, what lingers first is the image, a human-made fragment, light enough once to drift through ordinary life, now associated with sediments in the deepest known part of the planet. The surface world had sent something down, not as exploration, as residue, and that changes the emotional texture of the abyss. Until this point in our story, the trench often seemed to stand as counterweight to human reach, a place resisting casual intrusion, a final wilderness. But plastic at the bottom complicates that. It says our influence travels farther than our bodies, farther sometimes than our attention. And perhaps that is the most unsettling part. Pollution often moves invisibly, quietly, without spectacle, much like deep ocean processes themselves. depths. There is a dark symmetry there. One hidden system meeting another. How does such material reach great depth? Through many pathways: debris sinking, fragmentation, particles entering marine food webs, ocean circulation, long processes linking surface behavior to abyssal consequence. The Mariana is not isolated from the world above. It is connected to it. That may be the deeper lesson. Distance is not disconnection, and maybe we have often mistaken one for the other. There is something almost tragic in the contrast. Consider the engineering required to send a submersible deliberately to Challenger Deep. Years of design, complex logistics, extreme cost, immense care, and yet unwanted human traces may arrive by slower, indifferent routes. What we struggle heroically to reach, our waste may reach carelessly. That is not only irony, it is indictment. Exploration does not always flatter civilization. Sometimes it reflects it, and the Mariana in this chapter became a mirror showing not only our curiosity, but our consequences. Still, the story should be told carefully. Plastic at the bottom does not mean the trench is reduced to a dump. It remains one of Earth's most extraordinary environments. Its scale, mystery, geology, and living systems are not erased by contamination, but innocence, perhaps, is harder to speak of. And that matters, because part of loving remote places is believing they exceed us. When evidence shows they also bear our imprint, the love becomes more complicated, perhaps more responsible. Late at night, I sometimes think this discovery belongs to a larger human pattern. We often imagine frontiers in two phases. First, as untouched, then as known. But perhaps there is a third phase, realizing they were never separate from us in the ways we assumed. The Mariana is not outside human history. It is implicated in it, even at 11 kilometers down. That realization carries sorrow, but maybe also maturity, because honest relationship with the earth cannot depend on comforting illusions. It must survive difficult truths. And there is another layer. Microplastics, or pollutants in deep organisms, raise questions not only about debris as object, but contamination as process. When particles enter biology, the story moves from landscape to life, from where waste rests to what waste does. That deepens the ethical dimension. The abyss is not only receiving traces, its inhabitants may bear them. And once again, a frontier expands into a moral question. What do we owe places we can barely reach? What do we owe life adapted to worlds we scarcely understand? The Mariana does not answer, but it asks, and some places ask more powerfully by existing than by speaking. Yet I do not think this chapter ends in despair, not if told honestly, because discovery of harm can also generate response. Knowledge can wound and awaken. Many environmental reckonings begin when hidden consequences become visible, or in this case, become measurable in darkness. The abyss, strangely, can teach the surface. Perhaps that is one of its gifts. Even now, there is a haunting image I cannot leave. Imagine sediments settling in Challenger Deep, fine particles drifting down through black water, marine snow, mineral dust, and among them, microscopic fragments shaped by human manufacture. Nature's slow fall, mingled with our unintended signatures. That image is sorrowful, but also clarifying. It says there is no away. What leaves our hands may enter worlds we never see. The Mariana made that truth literal, and perhaps that is why this discovery belongs in the story, however painful, because the deepest place on earth should not be romanticized into false purity. It should be understood fully. Wonder and warning together, abyss and accountability. And once plastic was found at the bottom of Earth, the trench ceased to be only a symbol of what lies beyond human reach. It also became a reminder that human reach, for good and for harm, extends farther than we once believed. The Earth moves below. It is tempting to imagine the Mariana Trench as fixed, a vast wound in the earth, frozen in form, ancient, still, unchanging. After all, when humans speak of the deepest place on the planet, we often speak as if it were a permanent fact, like a number carved into stone. But the trench is not stone in that sense. It is process, and this changes everything, because the Mariana Trench is not merely a place where tectonic forces once acted. It is a place where they are acting now, at this moment, while ships pass above, while tides rise and fall, while people sleep. The earth moves below. That may be one of the most extraordinary truths in the whole story. The deepest place on earth is not a fossil of geological history. It is an active expression of geological history continuing. And perhaps late at night, few ideas feel more humbling than that, to realize that beneath the quiet sea surface, the planet is still shaping itself slowly. Yes, but not passively. The fundamental process is subduction. The plate tectonics framework explains the Mariana region as a boundary where the Pacific plate is being forced beneath the Mariana plate. Those words can sound technical, but what they describe is immense. A slab of Earth's crust descending into the mantle, not metaphorically descending, literally, the planet folding inward. And where that folding occurs, the trench exists. It is difficult to imagine such scale because human life is tuned to shorter rhythms. Days, years, generations. Tectonic motion belongs to another tempo. Centimeters per year, almost nothing in ordinary feeling. And yet, over millions of years, oceans change, mountains rise, trenches deepen, continents rearrange. The slow can become immense. This is one of geology's deepest lessons, and the Mariana teaches it beautifully, because the trench is not there despite movement. It is there because of movement. Its identity is dynamic. Take away motion, and eventually you take away the trench. There is something almost philosophical in that. Some realities exist not as objects, but as ongoing acts. The Mariana is one of them. Late at night, I sometimes think this changes how we should imagine the abyss, not as a static pit, but as a living boundary in geological time. Again, not living biologically, living dynamically, a place of continual becoming, even if that becoming unfolds too slowly for direct human perception. And perhaps that hidden slowness is part of its mystery. We cannot watch a trench deepen the way we watch a wave break. We infer the motion, measure it, model it, trust evidence across scales beyond intuition. In that sense, understanding the trench still requires humility, much as the first soundings did. There are further consequences. Subduction does not only shape depth, it links to earthquakes, volcanism, in broader arc systems, chemical exchanges between crust and mantle. The trench participates in planetary systems larger than itself. It is not isolated geology, it is networked geology, and this too is easy to overlook when speaking simply of the deepest place. Depth is only one expression of what the trench is doing, perhaps not even the most profound one, because depth describes form, movement describes cause, and cause often carries greater wonder. Imagine the ocean floor far below, where no human eye regularly watches, under stresses accumulated over ages, rock bending, fracturing, descending, not violently every moment, but persistently. The abyss, in this sense, is not resting. It is working silently. That word matters. Silently, because so much of the Earth's greatest labor is silent. Mountains rising by imperceptible increments, continents drifting, crust subducting. No sound reaches us from these vast processes as we live our days. Yet they continue, and sometimes I think deep ocean trenches teach a rare form of perspective. They remind us the planet is not backdrop, it is active presence. We live on a dynamic world, not a finished one. The Mariana is among the clearest proofs. There is also a strange comfort in that. A moving Earth can sound unsettling, and at times it is. But there is beauty too in a planet still creating itself, still unfinished, still capable of forms not wholly stabilized. A static Earth might be easier to imagine, but perhaps a living geological Earth is more magnificent. And what of the trench's exact depth? Even that has varied in estimates as measurement methods improved. This itself is a quiet reminder. The abyss resists perfect finality. Numbers refine, knowledge adjusts, reality exceeds our neat conclusions. Even the deepest point carries, within precision, a history of revision. I find that fitting. The trench should resist simplification. Its very nature does. There is an image I return to often. A ship above in calm water, perhaps moonlight on the surface, everything serene, and below, kilometers down, the Earth's crust continues its slow descent. The contrast is almost unbearable in its elegance. Surface stillness, subsurface motion, peace above, planetary labor below, both true at once. That is the Mariana, and perhaps that is why this section matters before we speak of earthquakes or other dramatic manifestations, because first we must understand the trench is not waiting passively for events. It is itself event, continuous event, ongoing geology, the Earth moving below. And once you begin to feel that, the deepest place on the planet seems less like a destination humans visit and more like a process humans briefly witness. Earthquakes in silence. If the Earth moves below, sometimes that movement slips, and when it slips, the trench trembles. This is where the Mariana story becomes harder, and perhaps even more haunting, because the deepest place on Earth is not only shaped by slow tectonic motion, it is also touched by sudden release. Earthquakes, though sudden in geology, can still mean forces building invisibly over immense spans before one moment of rupture. And what makes this especially unsettling is where these ruptures can occur, not only near the trench axis, not only beneath the seafloor, but deep within the descending slab itself, sometimes far below the ocean bottom, sometimes at depths where ordinary assumptions about rock failure begin to blur. The Mariana subduction system is known for deep and intermediate depth seismicity, including earthquakes extending to great depths within the subducting slab. This alone should slow the mind, because when we think of earthquakes, we often imagine the ground we stand on shaking, buildings swaying, dishes rattling, a felt event. But many earthquakes associated with the Mariana occur in profound invisibility. No city hears them, no shoreline necessarily senses them directly. No one on a passing ship may know they happened, and yet the earth has moved. This is why I call them earthquakes in silence, not because they make no physical waves. They do, but because they often occur beyond ordinary human witness. Hidden seismic events in hidden geological realms, the abyss keeping even its ruptures private. Late at night, that thought can feel almost unreal. Imagine darkness nearly 7 miles down, water under crushing pressure, sediments lying still, and somewhere beneath or near that trench, rock under accumulated stress gives way. A fracture, a shift, energy released. No thunder reaches the surface. No dramatic sound rolls across the sea. Only seismic waves traveling through earth and water. The event exists, even if almost no one perceives it directly. There is something elegant and unnerving in that. Violence without spectacle, motion without audience. Perhaps it fits the Mariana. Even its disturbances are often quiet to us. Some earthquakes here relate to bending and faulting as the oceanic plate approaches and enters subduction. Some occur deeper within the slab, where processes such as dehydration and changing mineral states may help generate seismicity. The science is still evolving, and I find that appropriate. A trench this deep should retain explanatory difficulty. It should not become too easy in language, but even without resolving every mechanism, the picture is clear enough. The abyss is not merely shaped by movement. It sometimes pulses with rupture, and there is a strange contrast here. We often imagine the Mariana as a symbol of stillness, dark stillness, precious stillness, geological patience, all true. Yet, within that stillness, instability lives. The quiet contains strain. Perhaps many profound things do. Surface calm does not guarantee inner rest. The ocean above may be smooth. Moonlight may lie flat across the Pacific. A ship may pass under stars, and below, the crust may be storing the conditions of an earthquake. This contrast returns again and again in deep ocean thought. Serenity above, stress below. Two truths occupying one place. There is historical weight too. The Mariana region has produced significant earthquakes, including large events associated with the broader subduction system. But what interests me most in a late night telling is not magnitude alone. It is the idea that even in one of Earth's remotest places, the planet does not merely sink, it adjusts, responds, sometimes abruptly, as though the trench, however slow its making, occasionally speaks in a sharper language, a seismic syllable, then silence again. I often think of how poorly human senses are equipped for this scale. We can hear a branch break, feel a nearby truck pass, notice a floorboard shift, but earthquakes deep in the Mariana, we know them largely through instruments, seismometers, listening where ears cannot, machines extending awareness once more. Just as robots helped reveal life in the abyss, instruments help reveal the tremors of the abyss again. We listen to darkness through indirect means. There is beauty in that continuity. Human understanding of the trench so often begins by listening. A sounding line, an echo, a seismic trace, knowledge arriving through signals. And perhaps that is why earthquakes here feel less like dramatic disaster in this story, and more like part of the trench's ongoing character. Not interruption, expression, the earth moving below. As we said in the last section, sometimes moves in pulses, and those pulses remind us the Mariana is not a finished structure. It is a dynamic boundary under tension, a place where even silence can hold stored force. That phrase stays with me, stored force in silence, because it applies so well here and perhaps beyond geology. But we remain with the trench, with darkness, with rock under pressure, with earthquakes almost no human directly witnesses. And once you begin to feel that, the Mariana seems deeper in another sense. Not only vertically deeper, dynamically deeper. A place where even stillness is active, and where, beneath the calm Pacific night, the earth may be trembling without anyone above ever knowing. The pressure that never stops. There are storms that pass. There are earthquakes that rupture, then subside. There are waves that rise, break, and disappear. Much of nature moves in events, beginnings, peaks, endings. But pressure in the Mariana Trench is not like that. It does not come in episodes. It does not arrive and withdraw. It does not rest. It is simply there, always. And perhaps that makes it, in some ways, the most difficult force in this story to truly imagine, because the human mind understands impacts more easily than constants. We grasp collision, explosion, sudden danger, but a force that presses continuously, without interruption, year after year, century after century, that belongs to another category of thought. A Challenger deep, pressure exceeds roughly 1,000 atmospheres, more than 1,000 times the pressure at sea level. Numbers help, but they do not fully convey experience. They describe. They do not make us feel. To feel even a hint of what such pressure means, we have to think differently. Imagine not a blow, but a weight on every surface, every angle, every seam. A weight not placed from above only, but pressing through surrounding water in all directions, unceasing. The ocean does not forget to press. It does not loosen at midnight. It does not soften with season. Pressure there is permanent condition, and late at night, that permanence carries almost philosophical force, because we live mostly among variables. Weather changes, temperatures shift, light returns each morning, but the abyss holds a constancy almost severe in its purity. One pressure, endless duration. It is hard not to see something elemental in that. Even our strongest materials must negotiate with it. Deep submergent spheres are not built thick by accident. Every curve matters. Every alloy matters. Every weakness matters. At such depths, engineering becomes a dialogue with pressure, or perhaps a negotiation with a force that does not bargain. And this, I think, is why the Mariana has always inspired such respect, not merely because it is deep, but because depth there is inseparable from relentless force. The trench is not only far down, it is heavily down. That distinction matters. Distance alone does not crush. Pressure does, and pressure is what makes the abyss feel qualitatively different from ordinary ocean. Even compared with much of the deep sea, the Hadal realm belongs to another order, another regime. There is something almost austere in imagining the trench floor under this load. Sediments lying under pressures we struggle to conceive. Organisms adapted, not despite constant force, but within it. Rock structures enduring under it. Everything there existing under terms set by pressure, as though pressure is not merely environment, it is law. And maybe that is the right word. Law, not event, not accident. Law of the abyss. There is a strange beauty in that severity, because constancy has its own grandeur. A mountain inspires through height. A trench inspires in part through invisible burden. One rises, one bears. Both evoke awe by different means. Sometimes I think the Mariana teaches us to respect forces precisely because they are quiet. Noise often commands attention. Silence often conceals magnitude. Pressure in the trench is silent, yet overwhelming. That inversion feels important. Some of the greatest powers in nature do not announce themselves loudly. They simply remain, and in remaining, shape well. Consider how often humans use under pressure as metaphor for temporary stress. The Mariana strips metaphor away. There, pressure is literal, total, and oddly, that literalness makes the metaphor seem thinner afterward. Language itself feels humble. Even the phrase crushing pressure, so often casually used, recovers seriousness when placed here, because here it is no exaggeration. It is physical truth, and truth of extraordinary scale. There is another thought that lingers while we speak of pressure, as if it acts on things. In the trench, it also selects what can endure, what can function, what can exist. Pressure is, in a sense, part of the filter shaping the abyss, an ecological and physical gatekeeper. Only what can negotiate it remains. That gives pressure a strangely creative role, not merely destructive, formative, and I find that beautiful. A force severe enough to destroy many structures also helps define a hidden world. How often does the same force both threaten and shape? More often than we notice. There is no dramatic story of pressure happening at Challenger Deep because it is always happening. And perhaps that is why it is so difficult to narrate. Events make stories easily. Constants require contemplation. This is a contemplative force, one you understand less by action than by dwelling with the idea of its persistence. Perhaps late-night storytelling is exactly suited to that, because it allows time to sit beside a thought, to let its scale slowly widen. Imagine the trench tonight. Now, as you listen, no submersible there, no camera, no human witness, only darkness, sediments, life in hidden forms, and around all of it, the same immense pressure that pressed yesterday and centuries ago and will press tomorrow. Still there, still total, still unrelieved. The pressure that never stops. I think that phrase matters because it reminds us the Mariana is not defined only by rare descents or historic moments. Its deepest reality is ongoing, moment by moment, whether anyone observes it or not. And perhaps that is what makes the abyss feel so ancient. Not simply age, continuity, a force without pause. And once you begin to feel that, the trench seems less like a dramatic destination and more like a permanent condition of the earth, a place where pressure itself has become part of the meaning of depth. The deepest wilderness left. There is a phrase often repeated because it carries a quiet shock. More human beings have traveled to the moon than have descended to Challenger Deep. It sounds, at first, almost impossible. The moon feels farther, more unreachable, more mythic, and in raw distance, of course, it is vastly farther. But remoteness is not measured only in miles. Sometimes it is measured in difficulty, and by that measure, the Mariana Trench belongs among the most remote places humans have ever confronted. Perhaps the deepest wilderness left. I linger on the word wilderness because it can be misunderstood. Wilderness does not mean empty. We have already seen the trench is not empty. It holds geology in motion, life under crushing pressure, even troubling traces of our own debris. So wilderness here means something subtler, a place still profoundly resistant to ordinary human presence, a place not domesticated, not made routine, not absorbed into daily human use, a place that remains in some essential way its own. The Mariana still carries that quality, and perhaps increasingly that matters because true remoteness has grown rare. Maps fill quickly now. Satellites image nearly everything visible from above. Routes become normalized. Frontiers shrink in imagination. Yet the deepest trench resists becoming ordinary. It remains difficult, costly, dangerous, slow to access. Even now, descent there is exceptional, not casual. That alone preserves something wild. Late at night, I sometimes think wilderness is partly defined by the degree to which a place refuses our usual assumptions of control. If that is true, the Mariana qualifies profoundly. Nothing about Challenger Deep invites casual mastery. The pressure resists it, darkness resists it, distance downward resists it. And perhaps this resistance is precisely what makes the trench feel morally important, not merely scientifically important. Important as a reminder that not all of Earth has yielded to convenience. Some places still ask reverence. There is another reason the moon comparison lingers. It unsettles a modern bias. We often imagine technological civilization steadily erasing difficulty, but the trench says, not entirely. Some difficulties remain intrinsically hard, not because progress has failed, but because reality has depth, literal depth. And reality does not owe us easy access. There is dignity in remembering that. The abyss restores proportion. It tells us power has limits, capability has edges, and perhaps that is healthy knowledge. There is also a strange inversion here. People often speak of outer space as the great unknown, and certainly much of it is. But large portions of our own deep ocean remain less explored in direct observational terms than many assume. The frontier beneath us still rivals the frontier above us in mystery. That should astonish us more often. A hidden wilderness under the sea on our own planet, still largely beyond ordinary reach. It sounds almost like old exploration literature, yet it is contemporary fact, and maybe that is part of its beauty. The age of wonder did not end, it merely moved deeper. There is a quiet ethical thread here too. When a place remains rare to enter, perhaps it deserves a certain care in how we imagine approaching it. Not every frontier is invitation to exploit. Some may be invitation to understand without possessing. The Mariana encourages that thought because conquest language has always sounded wrong there. Too loud, too crude. The trench answers better to humility. Perhaps wilderness always does. I think too of how little human noise reaches the bottom. No cities, no highways, no aircraft overhead, no ordinary machinery. Whatever sounds exist there belong mostly to geology, water, biology, or the rare intrusion of exploration. In a human sense, it remains almost acoustically wild. That matters. Silence itself is now a rare ecological quality. The Mariana still holds forms of it, even after all we have discussed, even after plastic, even after contamination concerns. That remains true. The deepest wilderness left does not mean untouched in a naive sense. It means still fundamentally beyond assimilation. There is a difference, and an important one. Sometimes people think wilderness requires purity. I do not think so. I think wilderness can survive damage, though it calls us to respond to damage honestly. Its essence lies not in fantasy of perfection, but in enduring otherness. The Mariana still possesses that otherness profoundly. Imagine for a moment a submersible light turning off at Challenger Deep. Darkness complete, pressure immense, no human settlement within miles upon miles in any direction, no ordinary path in or out, only the hidden earth. If that is not wilderness, what is? And perhaps this section belongs here, after pressure, for a reason, because pressure explains why the wilderness endures. The environment itself helps preserve remoteness. Difficulty protects, at least partly. There is irony in that too. What makes the trench hard for us helps keep it wild from us. A severe mercy, perhaps. And so when people say the Mariana may be the deepest wilderness left, I hear not a slogan, but a meditation on remoteness, on humility, on the value of places that remain difficult, on the possibility that civilization still needs frontiers it cannot casually absorb. Maybe especially that, because without such places, we may begin to imagine ourselves larger than we are. The trench corrects that illusion quietly by existing, and once you feel that, the Mariana no longer seems only the deepest point on Earth. It feels like something rarer, a remaining measure of the planet's freedom from us. Section 5.1. If Everest fell here. There are facts so strange they resist ordinary understanding. We hear them, we repeat them, and yet they do not fully enter the mind. The Mariana Trench often generates facts like that, but perhaps none has endured more powerfully than this one. If Mount Everest were dropped into Challenger Deep, its summit would still remain below sea level. It is one of those comparisons people return to because numbers alone fail us. 10,000 meters, 11,000. These can become abstractions, but Everest we can picture. Snow, height, thin air, the long human struggle upward. It belongs to imagination, and when imagination meets the trench through that comparison, something shifts. Depth becomes felt, not fully, perhaps never fully, but felt enough to disturb ordinary scale. Late at night, I think this comparison matters not because it is dramatic, but because it reveals how poor human intuition often is with extremes. We understand height better than depth, perhaps because we live under sky. We see mountains, we do not see trenches. The visible trains imagination, the hidden starves it. So Everest becomes a bridge, a way for the mind to cross towards something it cannot otherwise hold. Yai me 11,100. Yet even here, I think the comparison does more than illustrate size. It alters perspective, because Everest often symbolizes human aspiration, climbing, achievement, the upward reach. But when you imagine the highest mountain disappearing into the deepest trench and still not emerging, aspiration meets scale. Human symbols meet planetary magnitude, and the planet quietly exceeds them. There is humility in that. A mountain that has strained generations of climbers, reduced in this thought experiment to something the abyss can contain. Not entirely, almost, but enough to make the mind slow down. And perhaps slowing down is part of what this section is for. Part 5 is not merely about facts. It is about what those facts do to consciousness, how the trench begins to redefine smallness. And this is where that begins. With Everest falling, I sometimes imagine the image literally, not as geology, of course, but as meditation. A white peak descending through black water, passing zones of fading light, entering coal, continuing down, its summit sinking lower and lower, until, even at rest in Challenger Deep, it does not break the surface. That image has almost dreamlike power, and yet it is built from real scale. Reality occasionally permits images that feel surreal. The Mariana is full of them. There is another layer too. We often measure greatness upward, tallest building, highest peak, highest flight. There is something revealing in confronting a greatness measured downward instead. It unsettles cultural instinct, suggests magnificence can lie in descent as much as ascent, in hiddenness as much as visibility, in what withdraws from view as much as what rises before it. That feels strangely profound, as though the trench teaches another grammar of awe, not vertical triumph, vertical surrender, down rather than up, and still awe, perhaps especially awe. There is also a scientific subtlety worth honoring. Depth estimates have been refined over time, measurements improve, numbers shift slightly, science sharpens itself, but the comparison survives because its meaning does not depend on exact meter precision. Whether one formulation leaves Everest narrowly submerged or deeply so, the conceptual force remains. The trench is astonishingly deep, beyond ordinary intuition, and perhaps that resilience of meaning matters. Some truths remain powerful, even as measurement grows more exact, because their philosophical weight exceeds numerical nuance. This is one of them. Late at night, I sometimes think the Everest comparison is really less about Everest than about scale itself, about the moment when human-centered proportion gives way, when we feel, however briefly, that the world is built on dimensions not arranged around our habits of thought. That can feel unsettling, but also cleansing. Perspective often is. There is relief, strangely, in remembering the earth exceeds us, its depths, its heights, its ages. We do not have to be the measure of everything. The Mariana whispers that, and the Everest image makes it audible. There is one more reason I love this comparison. It joins opposites, highest and deepest, peak and abyss, snow and black water, thin air and crushing pressure, two extremes held in one thought. And when extremes meet, understanding sometimes opens, because contrast clarifies. The trench becomes clearer through Everest. Everest becomes stranger through the trench. Both are enlarged by being imagined together. Few comparisons do that. This one does. And perhaps that is why it endures in books, documentaries, quiet conversations, and late-night reflections alike. It is not merely a statistic. It is a doorway, a way into feeling what deepest place on earth might begin to mean. Only begin, because no comparison fully contains the abyss. But some comparisons help us approach it. This is one, and once you truly picture Mount Everest falling into Challenger Deep, the Mariana stops sounding like a remote scientific term. It becomes something almost physical in the imagination, a depth large enough to swallow our most familiar symbol of height and remain deeper still. Why humans keep going down? After all this, the darkness, the pressure, the risk, the silence, the remoteness, a question remains that may be more human than scientific. Why keep going down? Why return to a place so difficult to reach, so resistant to presence, so indifferent to whether we arrive at all? Why does the abyss continue to call people? Because it does, quietly, persistently, across generations. And I do not think the answer is conquest, at least not at its deepest level. Conquest is too shallow a word for the Mariana, too loud, too surface-bound. No one who truly understands Challenger Deep speaks easily of conquering it. The trench strips that language away. So what remains? Curiosity, certainly, but even curiosity may be too small a word. Something larger often hides inside it, a need to know, a refusal to let mystery remain merely because it is difficult, perhaps even a form of reverence, because to study something deeply is often a way of honoring its existence. Late at night, I sometimes think humans keep going down for the same reason they have crossed deserts, climbed peaks, sailed unknown oceans, looked through telescopes, and asked questions children ask naturally, because the unknown exerts gravity, not physical gravity, intellectual gravity, spiritual gravity, if one allows the phrase. Mystery pulls, and some people answer. The Mariana is one of the clearest examples. It offers almost no practical seduction in ordinary terms, no easy resources, no comfort, no obvious reward, proportional to the effort, and yet people design vehicles for it, fund expeditions, spend years preparing for hours below. That tells us something. The motive runs deeper than utility. There is a human hunger, not satisfied by usefulness alone. Knowledge itself can be worth pursuing, and perhaps that is one of civilization's finest traits, to seek not only what serves immediate need, but what enlarges understanding. The abyss enlarges understanding. That is reason enough, but I think there is more. Sometimes we go toward extremes because they reveal us. Pressure tests metal, and frontiers test motives. At the Mariana, vanity tends to sound thin, posture tends to fall away. What remains is often seriousness, humility, attention. The trench asks those things, and perhaps some are drawn precisely because it asks them. Profound places often demand a better version of us. That can be attractive. There is also the scientific reason, and it should not be diminished. The deep sea holds knowledge relevant to geology, biology, climate systems, material science, even questions touching the origins and limits of life. These are not small matters. To descend is also to investigate reality, where reality is least familiar, and unfamiliar reality has often transformed thought. The Mariana has already done so. Why would we stop asking what else it might teach? Still, if I am honest, I think part of the answer lies beyond reasoned categories. Some people go down because wonder itself can become vocation. Because once you have glimpsed how vast the unknown is, ordinary boundaries no longer feel sufficient. This has happened throughout history. The explorer, the scientist, the pilgrim, the artist, their motives sometimes overlap more than we admit. Each, in a way, moves toward what exceeds them. The trench belongs to that tradition, and perhaps that is why even people who will never descend can feel drawn by its story. The impulse is recognizable. It belongs to something widely human. There is another thought I cannot avoid. Sometimes we go down because the abyss changes the scale of our concern. Surface life can narrow perspective, schedules, arguments, vanities, noise. Then a place like the Mariana enters thought, and suddenly one remembers the earth is older, deeper, stranger than daily preoccupations suggest. That can feel like relief, a widening perspective as medicine. Maybe some keep going down because they have felt that and wish to feel it again. There is beauty too in the fact that going down here is not regression, though language might imply it. It is another kind of ascent inward, a descent that elevates understanding, a paradox, but true. Some journeys downward are enlarging. The Mariana proves it. I often return to the first sounding line from HMS Challenger. Someone lowered a line and asked how deep the water was. In a sense, every later descent extends that same question. The form changes, the question persists. How deep is reality? Not only ocean reality, and perhaps humans keep going down because we have not finished asking. Maybe we never will. There is something beautiful in unfinished questioning. Civilizations need it. Without it, curiosity hardens into complacency. The abyss resists complacency. It remains difficult enough to keep wonder alive. That may be one of its gifts, and perhaps the simplest answer after all these reflections is this: humans keep going down because some mysteries deserve approach even when they cannot be exhausted. Especially then, because if a mystery could be exhausted, it would no longer be profound. The Mariana remains profound. That is why we return, not to finish it, but to keep learning in its presence. And once you see descent that way, not as domination, but as conversation, then the question changes. It is no longer, why do humans keep going down? It becomes, how could we not? The abyss as a mirror. There comes a point in thinking about the Mariana Trench when the subject begins to change. At first, we think we are studying a place, a trench, a geological structure, a deepest point. Then, slowly, almost without noticing, the place begins studying us back. Not literally, but reflectively. The abyss becomes a mirror, and perhaps this is where the story turns most inward, because by now, we have spoken of soundings, descents, pressure, life, earthquakes, wilderness. All of that belongs to the trench. But what does the trench reveal about those who look into it? That is another question, and I think a profound one. The first thing it reveals may be scale, or rather our misjudgment of scale. Human beings live as though our dimensions are central. Our cities feel large. Our histories feel immense. Our concerns can feel total. Then the Mariana enters thought, and suddenly, nearly 7 miles of water, pressures beyond ordinary comprehension, geological processes older than civilization, and our centrality softens. We become smaller, not in dignity, in proportion. That is not humiliation, it is clarity, and clarity can be a kind of grace. Late at night, I sometimes think many people resist such perspective because smallness sounds threatening, but perhaps it need not be. Perhaps recognizing we are small within a vast reality is not diminishment, but liberation. We do not have to pretend to be the measure of everything. The abyss relieves us of that burden, and that is one way it mirrors us. It shows where we have exaggerated ourselves. There is another reflection. The trench reveals something about curiosity. Why would a species capable of remaining comfortably at the surface build instruments, submersibles, theories, and entire disciplines to approach a darkness it did not need to enter for survival? Because curiosity is not decorative, it is structural to who we are. The abyss mirrors that too. It reflects not only our limits, but our reaching, our willingness to move toward what exceeds us. That is a beautiful thing to see reflected. Perhaps one of the most beautiful. Then there is humility, or perhaps the lack of it. The Mariana can expose the difference, approach it as conquest, and the language sounds thin. Approach it with respect, and something truer appears. The trench seems to sort motives, at least in imagination. It reveals whether we come to dominate or to understand, and maybe all profound places do this. They reflect the posture we bring. The abyss simply makes the reflection harder to ignore. I think too of fear. The trench mirrors fear, not because it is horror, but because it presents conditions where human control narrows. Pressure, darkness, distance, uncertainty. These stir something ancient in the mind, and how we respond with paralysis, with bravado, with disciplined attention. That too is reflection. Frontiers often show character. The Mariana but perhaps more starkly than most, there is a quieter mirror still. Mortality. That may sound heavy, but I do not mean it darkly, only honestly. A place so ancient, so indifferent to individual lifespan, has a way of placing our briefness in view, and strangely, that can deepen appreciation rather than diminish it. What is brief can be precious. The abyss, by contrasting our small duration with geological time, can make ordinary life feel more luminous, a strange gift from darkness. There is also a moral reflection. We spoke of plastic at the bottom. The trench mirror's consequence. It shows that actions taken far away can arrive in hidden places. That is not only an environmental lesson, it is a lesson about interconnection, about how little is truly isolated. The abyss reflects that too, and perhaps we need such mirrors. Civilizations do. Without them, we can mistake, reach for wisdom, power, for understanding. The Mariana complicates those mistakes quietly by existing. Sometimes I wonder if every great frontier becomes, eventually, less interesting as object than as mirror. The mountain, the desert, the polar ice, outer space, each reveals something about those who approach it. The Mariana belongs in that lineage, but perhaps with a peculiar intensity, because depth has always carried symbolic power. To go down is never only physical. In human imagination, it invites inward meaning. Even when we resist romanticizing it, the symbolism arrives anyway, and perhaps rightly, because some realities carry symbolic resonance, not because we project it carelessly, but because reality itself is layered, literal, and reflective at once. The trench is such a reality. There is an image I return to. A person looking over a calm Pacific surface at night, seeing almost nothing unusual, knowing that far below lies Challenger deep, and feeling suddenly not terror but proportion, a kind of quiet reordering inside. That is the mirror, not dramatic revelation, subtle adjustment, perspective, settling differently. Perhaps that is how true mirrors work. They do not invent, they reveal. And what does the Mariana reveal? In the end, that we are small, yet curious, fragile, yet daring, limited, yet capable of wonder, complicit, yet able to learn. Those are not trivial reflections. They may be among the most important things a frontier can show, which is why I do not think the abyss is only a place humans study. I think sometimes it is a place humans remember themselves. And once you feel the Mariana as mirror, the deepest point on Earth stops being only a remote trench in the Pacific. It becomes something closer, a dark, silent surface in which the human spirit, looking down, catches sight of itself. After midnight, the trench remains. And then, after the soundings, after Trieste, after the robots, after the solitary descent, after all the questions we have carried down into darkness, there comes this final thought. The trench remains. That may be the simplest sentence in the entire story, and perhaps the deepest, because human narratives have movement, beginnings, climaxes, conclusions. We like endings. History often asks for them, but the Mariana Trench does not end when a story about it ends. It continues, untroubled by our stopping. And there is something profoundly late night in resting with that. After midnight, when ships pass less frequently, when harbors quiet, when even cities soften their noise. The trench remains still there, still black, still under crushing pressure, still receiving the slow fall of sediments through dark water, still holding life in forms we barely understand, still moving with the earth below, still deeper than ordinary thought can easily bear. Nothing in our telling has changed that. Stories illuminate, they do not exhaust, and the abyss cannot be exhausted. I think that matters, because modern life often creates the illusion that to explain something is to contain it. But the Mariana resists containment. You can map it, descend into it, model its tectonics, sample its sediments, and still something essential exceeds summary. Mystery survives knowledge. Perhaps that is one reason the trench feels almost inexhaustibly compelling. It refuses reduction. Late at night, I sometimes imagine all human presence leaving the scene entirely. No research vessels, no sonar, no satellites interpreting data, no one speaking the words. Mariana Trench, only the trench itself existing, whether named or unnamed, as it did before us, as it will after us. That thought can feel sobering, but also strangely peaceful. Reality does not depend on our attention to remain real. There is comfort in that. A world larger than awareness, stable in its own being. The trench belongs to that order. There is another layer throughout this story. We have often contrasted surface and depth, light and darkness, noise and silence, human scale and planetary scale. Here, in the final section, those contrasts soften, because perhaps the deepest lesson is not opposition, but coexistence. Our brief lives above, ancient processes below, both true, both sharing one earth. The abyss does not cancel human life, it contextualizes it. And context is often gentler than we expect. To be small within something vast can feel not only humbling, but hell. There is a quiet beauty in that thought. I return to the image of a submersible light going dark, a beam extinguished, human illumination withdrawn, and immediately the trench resumes its own night, as though our presence was only a temporary interruption in a much older continuity. That image has always moved me, because it says something true about exploration. We visit, the earth abides. That is not failure. It is relationship, and perhaps a healthy one. There is wisdom in visiting without imagining we become the center of what we visit. The Mariana teaches that. Maybe all true wilderness does. And after midnight, the phrase itself carries atmosphere. There is something almost liturgical in imagining the trench continuing while the world sleeps. Pressure holding, tectonic motion persisting, hidden organisms moving through cold, dark, fine particles settling, silence layered upon silence, a kind of planetary vigil, the deepest place keeping its own watch. Perhaps that is too poetic, or perhaps not. Sometimes reality earns poetry. I think the abyss does. There is also this. All through the story, humans kept going down, and yet, in the end, the trench remains more itself than ours. That may be the most honest ending possible. Not possession, not mastery. Presence, then departure. And what remains? The trench. I find that beautiful, because it rescues the story from becoming only about human achievement It restores the subject, the abyss itself, as it should. And maybe that is where a late-night journey belongs to end, not with a dramatic final revelation, but with a return to silence, to the calm Pacific surface under stars, to black water below, to a depth no eye now sees, to a place where, even as this story ends, nothing has ended there. The Mariana Trench remains after midnight, after memory, after language. It remains, and perhaps in some quiet way. That is why we will keep returning to think about it, because some realities do not merely invite explanation, they invite contemplation again and again, like the sea, like darkness, like the deepest place on earth.